Yeah, great.
Colleagues, I'm admitting everybody. Thankfully, we've been able to sort it out. And thanks to our to Ariana and colleagues. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good greetings from cloudy Turin. And welcome back to everybody to this second webinar of the Brics CIS series. I would, of course, be handing over shortly to Anita, but just before that, just a few housekeeping issues that I wanted to highlight. I believe some of you have had issues with accessing the recordings on the eCampus platform. There has been a technical issue which we are in the process of sorting. We will be able to clear that off, we hope, by the end of today. I have just spoken to the chief of the information communication and technology service here at the center, and one of our senior colleagues is working with Ariana to sort that out. So my apologies for this little hiccup. We hope that this will be sorted by the end of today, and more importantly, this will not be the case for the recordings of this particular webinar, which we also hope will be available to you by the end of today. General reminder, as always, interpretation of this webinar series is available in Chinese, English, and Russian. You already know how to access it by clicking the interpretation globe at the bottom, and I would leave you to do that. And last but not the least, I would request all of you to access the materials, the presentations, etc., that are being made by experts who are invited in these various webinars on the eCampus platform, for which you have all received and you have all received invitation, a sign-on password, which you will be able to access using that. So, having said that, it is my absolute pleasure to pass on the responsibility of facilitating today's webinar today to my dear Brics sister, Anita Morim, who is going to take us through these 2 hours that we have together. There is also, unlike last time, a group work. So it is for which I'm sure Anita will be able to give us more details as part of the thing. So without much ado, Anita, your floor.
Many more from China this time, and also from CIS. A few Brazilians who are waking up very early, like our friend Jose Ivan Meyer. So welcome, because there is very early in the morning. And yes, so we are going to post the videos just to continue that part, Sneho, on the meeting point, but I'm not sharing the address here because there's been some hiccups. We know that the Russian is available, and we know that some colleagues from Russian-speaking countries have requested. So that one can already be seen, but we have a problem now with Chinese and English, which will be solved, as you say. So going back now to our workshop, we will first start with some presentations, and in particular to Philippe Marcadin and Santosh Mehrotra. And then I will explain the exercise, and Sneha, you'll be co-moderating with me, so don't feel that you will You're escaping the duty. No, I'm just kidding. It's a pleasure to co-moderate with my Brics brothers, Nehal, and we will continue this workshop series like that. So first of all, I wanted to just recall that last time we had a very, very interesting session. It was a bit of the opening, but also we had already some initial concepts provided by Philippe Mercadin, who is chief of the Inclusive Labor Markets, Labor Relations, Working Conditions branch of the ILO. And now we're going to go more in depth into the whole question of formalization of the informal economy, with, of course, Brics CIS perspective, and looking into also any possible South-South linkages that can have. I'm not going to give the full bio of Philippe because you have already done so, Snehal, last time, and it's in the recording. But in any case, it's a pleasure to have a colleague and a friend and also a person very knowledgeable and also the focal point for this whole question of formalization of informal economy, so extremely knowledgeable with us. And straight after that, we will have a presentation from Santosh Mehrotra, who is a visiting professor for the Center of Development Studies and University of Bath. He's professor and chairperson of the Center for Labor of Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. And he has a very long biography because he has so many achievements, and that can all be found in the Google Docs for the attached agenda that has been sent to you, and also in the platform. But some of you already know him because he also was the person who wrote the background document for the Brics knowledge series. And we send around a small version, which I will ask maybe Duncan to share here, which was a synthesis of this work that would also, some of his findings are also relevant for the for the current Brics CIS workshop. So without much ado, I'll first give the floor to Philippe Mercadin, my friend and colleague, to speak a little more on the question of formalization of informal economy, and especially maybe some relevance for Brics and CIS, as well as South-South cooperation. So over to you, Philippe.
Thank you, Anita. Hello, everybody. Hello, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be again with you this week and to see Santosh that I didn't see since a long time, Santosh. So I will speak about transition to informality, this time entering a little more on substance issue and make some relation with the discussion you had in the Brics. Okay? So to begin, and in line with discussions that took place in the governing body at the ILO, I would like to recall that, as stated by recommendation 204, most people enter in the informal economy not by choice. This is very important part of the discussion. They enter because there is no consequence, there is a lack of opportunity in the formal economy, and they have no other means of livelihood. So for many, not all, but many, this working in the informal economy is an obligation to get a livelihood. The important role the informal economy plays for many people in this world should not, however, hide the multiple adverse consequences informality generates for individual enterprise and societies. COVID-19 crisis has laid bare of the vulnerability of workers, the fragility of enterprise that operate in the informal economy, and highlighted that the informal economy undermines the government's scope of action, including its capacity to prevent the spread of the virus and to support adequate recovery. This being said, let's go back on how to facilitate transition to formality. First, transition from the informal to the formal economy cannot be limited to the transformation or the shift of informal economy workers and unit into formal economy workers and unit. In fact, this transition can be considered as relying on three pillars as stated in recommendation 204. First pillar, promoting the creation and sustainability of enterprise and decent jobs in the formal economy. Secondly, facilitate effectively the transition from informal to become formal. And the third objective is preventing the informalization of formal economy jobs. So it's not only about shifting people from the informal economy to the formal economy. And in fact, when we look at evidence, generating formal jobs is very part of the story. We didn't know any country that has reached to reduce significantly informality without having an economy that creates good jobs. And this is entirely part of the discussion on transition from informal to the formal economy. Job-rich growth, but quality job-rich growth, I would say. And the third objective, preventing the informalization of formal economy jobs, underlines that we should keep in mind that the transition is not only from the informal to the formal economy, as we have the tendency to believe. The transition is also in the other way, from formal becoming informal. It's like poverty. You have poor people that are becoming not poor, and you have non-poor people that are becoming poor. In the informality debate, the transition from the formal to the informal is much less underlined than when we are speaking of poverty. I would say that the prevention of informality is a subject of growing concern among ILO constituents. It means among almost all countries in the world. And the ILO, in response to that, is developing currently a full set of activities on preventing transition from the formal to the informal economy. And as far as I know, this is the first time the ILO is doing such a job. And we should not believe that policy to facilitate transition from informal to formal are the same that policy to prevent informalization of formal jobs. So this is another line of work. And I personally found that this is probably the line the less developed in recommendation 204, despite the objective is there. Second point, transition to formality is a complex and long-term process. We didn't know countries that miraculously have reduced very significantly in a very limited number of years informality. This didn't exist. It's complex, it's a long-term process. And to facilitate transition to formality, you should address the root causes of informality that are multiple. They relate to the economic and institutional environment, such as I just mentioned, the inability of the economy to create quality jobs, but also the lack of transparency and accountability of public institutions. There is also a tendency when we discuss informality to put the responsibility of informality on people. This is wrong. Often, it is the institution that generate informality. They also relate, and this is linked to what I just said, to the characteristic of the person or enterprise concerned. For example, the level of education, if you have a low level of education, the probability to be in the informal economy increase. This is clear. This also, you have a number of underlying factors that are mentioned indirectly in recommendation 204, but that also drive the conditions. For example, people without birth certificate, how you can really enter in the formal economy if formally you don't exist because you have no paper that demonstrate that you have an identity. And I know that India, for example, made a lot of efforts in that sense. The lack of property right. you have a full discourse on relation to transition to formalities that also link very much informality with property rights. So this is also a determinant. Possible causes of informality also include hazardous events such as climate catastrophe or pandemics, as we have just seen. It is for understanding these causes that in the ILO, we strongly recommend to establish a diagnosis of informality that review both the size, but also the driver of informality and the effectiveness of existing measures to reduce informality.
Philippe, petite pause. There's apparently a little problem with the Chinese interpreter not being assigned to a booth. So I hope that has been solved. So over to you, Philippe.
Okay. So I was saying that it's very, if you want to address, you want to facilitate transition to formality, you should address the root causes of informality. It is why in the ILO, we strongly recommend to do diagnosis. And this has been highlighted by the papers that Santosh prepared for the Brics country, for example, much less evident as far as I remember in the work that has been developed for the CSI country. But this is very important. If you don't understand the reality and why informality exists, your capacity to design appropriate public policies is very limited. Third, there is a strong variability of pathway to transition to formality depending on national circumstance, public preference, characteristic of the informal economy and labor market. Oh, no, sorry.
Sorry. No problem. That's maybe for us to solve the Chinese. Apparently, Mr. Xin Wu is still unassigned. There's somebody assigned, but not this other one.
Go back. We are on it, Anita. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Philippe, pardon,
so
allez-y.
Go back. Sorry for this. I forgot to put my mobile on mute. So I was saying that you have strong variability of the pathway toward transition to formalities. There is no one approach that should be applied everywhere. This also, we should forget about that. And this is also very stated in recommendation 204. Fourth, the informal economy is everything except an homogeneous entity. It includes a variety of worker and enterprise. Understanding and taking into account such a diversity with tailored approach as specified in recommendation 204 is essential. I will say that for me, this is the most important part. Don't put all the informal economy in one box. It is not. For example, the policy to formalize, to address undeclared work in formal enterprise, that is a form of informality, has almost nothing to do with the policy to formalize street vendors, and nothing to do with the policy to formalize home-based workers or domestic workers. So really, it's very important to address the specific situation in informality you want to address. You have some drivers that are transversal of informality to all groups, but at the time you want to adopt policy, you should be much more specific. The fifth point, is that we know that integrated approach work better. And this has been also highlighted by both groups, CIS group, but also Brics groups, that this was important to go. For example, if we speak about formalization of enterprise, this is about cost of registration, cost of compliance, but also productivity of the enterprise, access to social security of the workers employed, and effective strategy, I would say, are integrated strategy if you really want to progress. In most cases, effective strategy combine intervention to increase the ability of the formal economy to absorb informal workers and enterprise, that we can say inclusion, but also to strengthen the ability of individual and enterprise to enter in the formal economy. This will be insertion. So acting from the two sides, and we put that very much in evidence in the theory of change that I shared with you in the last webinar, is what is the most effective. We also observe that some innovative approaches are developed by several countries, such as simplified scheme for micro entrepreneurs that, in addition to require simple and quick procedure for registration of the business, merge tax and social security contribution, including by using flat rate payment, give advantage of registered businesses in terms of access to business services, public market, and so on. These schemes present promising results, but deeper evaluation are needed to review their possible unintended effect. For example, in Latin America, you have a lot of discussion about the unintended effect of such schemes. One innovative area in which we are investing quite a lot is harnessing technology for the transition to formality. For example, utilization of mobile phone for registering workers or delivering social protection benefits. This has been highlighted in the conclusion of the Brics meeting. Also, results are promising, but digital solutions are not a miracle that will eliminate informality by themselves. As I mentioned before, some sources of informality are structural, such as the lack of accountability and effectiveness of public institutions that cannot be overcome only by the use of technology. We should also keep in mind that many informal workers and entrepreneurs have no access or not able to utilize technology, and they should not be left behind. When I look at the result of the exchange between Brics country and between CIS country, as I said last time, I saw that some topics that I just mentioned have been highlighted, such as, for example, the necessity to develop integrated approach. But other aspects have been treated very differently between the two groups, probably because perception and reality are different. But I think that, for example, the necessity to have a diagnostic or the necessity to extend legal coverage is true everywhere. And I can provide example on that everywhere. So probably we can also learn about not only about what is common between the two groups, but the point mentioned in the exchange between one group of countries that have not been highlighted by the other groups. And we should also, at some point, have not been really mentioned, like productivity, for example, that I discussed very briefly last time. So this is also an invitation to continue to learn from others. Finally, I would like to provide some clarification about two controversial questions that are often raised. Some workers and enterprise have the potential to formalize in the short run, while for others, and I will say for the majority in many countries, this is not yet a realistic possibility. So is transition to formality a strategy that leaves behind the most vulnerable? It means those that are not capable to become formal in the short run. My response is no. For those who cannot join the formal economy in the short run, we must devote attention to reducing the decent work deficits they face, in particular by enabling their access to a social security floor, to occupational safety and health measures, by fighting discrimination, child labor, forced labor, by protecting their right to associate and to organize. Addressing all those issues provide important step on the way to transition to formality in the long run and should be understood as part of the formalization process. So we should not focus only on those that will become formal easily. Don't forget the most vulnerable. This is very important, and this is a very strong discussion in the ILO. The second thing that we also observe a lot with other UN agencies in particular is transition to formality is perceived as a coercive approach, aiming to put people under the law with a baton, you know? Again, this is wrong. Formalization are not restricted to compliance with law and regulation. For example, I mentioned increasing productivity is a condition for the formalization of many micro and small enterprises, which provide 44% of global employment. So we are not speaking about a coercive approach that will put people under the law with a baton. Transition to formality is to help people to participate in the socio-economic development of their country and to benefit from it. Okay, I will stop here and thank you very much.
Merci, Philippe. Thank you very much. This is a great presentation and a great background. I think I will open for questions after Santosh Mehrotra's presentations, and then we can address a little bit some of the questions. So please write down your questions for Philippe and keep them close to you. In between, we will listen from Santosh Mehrotra. He will focus more on the findings of his paper. And the next, because we will also have the privilege of having Santosh twice, like we had with Philippe. And the next term around, we will focus on his recommendations. But anyway, over to you, Santosh. I think you are still muted.
Sorry about that. Lovely to see you, Philippe, and good to see you all back. I'm pleased to be back with you. Without much ado and losing time, I'm going to start. So this is, I hope you can see my presentation. Can you? Can you just confirm to me?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Okay, I want to go to slideshow quickly. Okay. So I'm going to start. This is the structure. So sorry, I'm going to be focusing on the Brics and what we can learn together, or rather what I learned in the process of doing this research on the Brics. And the structure of my presentation is actually very brief. I'm not going to take too much time. I'm going to mainly talk about the relationship between growth and informality and, discuss some stylized facts and to connect what Philippe was saying. And it's always a pleasure listening to Philippe. He's so clear-headed on these matters. To connect what Philippe was saying about the three ways in which formality can be improved or increased. The first being increasing formality, the second being transition from informal to formal, and the third was preventing informality. Now, growth is clearly one way of increasing formality, but it might be a necessary condition, but it's certainly not a sufficient condition. So I'm going to be also speaking about the pattern of growth, because that can prevent informalization. I won't be saying very much about the transition from informality to formality. That I will be discussing in the next presentation. And so I'm going to sort of move very quickly to this relationship between growth, GDP growth, obviously, and informality, which I think all of us know happens to be a rather complex relationship. And I'm going to sort of dwell on this and come at it from different angles. So in development economics, there are two types of explanations for informality arising and for its persistence. And one relates to growth, which is what I'm going to dwell on today. And then the second type consists of institutions. And it's this combination of growth and the right type of institutions, the right type of growth and the right type of institutions, which can actually achieve the three types of goals that Philippe was talking about. I'm going to focus here on growth per se. Now, one simple fact that we all know is that a high GDP per capita normally translates into low informality and vice versa. Now, we know that the upper middle income countries, as defined by the World Bank, have higher informality than the low middle income countries, which in turn may have lower informality than the low income countries. So there's, in a sense, a pecking order that there is a broad, simple correlation at a cross-sectional level between high GDP per capita level and low informality. But, and this is where the complexity already enters, at a given level of GDP per capita, we can see that there is much variation in informality levels. And we're going to sort of, in respect of growth, we're trying to sort of, in this part of my presentation, tease out what are possibly some of the sources in informality. The many sources of informality and the variation between countries, even if they are at the same level of per capita income, also owes itself to institutions, something I will not deal with today. So one question, I mean, I've just spoken so far about level of per capita income. Yes, high level of per capita income has, at a cross-sectional level, you look at countries, you find that informality is low. But what about fast growth? Is fast growth the answer? Now, fast growth is usually a function of rapidly rising share of industry and of services and a falling share of agriculture, which many countries in the global south have managed to achieve, and some have achieved it much faster than others. But look at what happens to outcomes in respect of informality, even when you have very fast growth. China and Vietnam has seen very fast growth. Plus, they've seen some falling share of informality, but it's not a very significant share in the share of informality. India, by contrast, despite rapid growth, has seen practically no fall in informality. And all three have seen structural transformation of the kind that I mentioned, but very varying levels of informality reduction over this period of growth and of structural transformation. So then the next question that I ask myself, if we should perhaps investigate, is does the pace of growth matter less than the pattern of growth? So in other words, even if you have a slightly lower pace of growth, if the pattern of growth is more inclusive, generates jobs, especially in the formal sector, then that might be more important from a perspective of generating informality. So first, sort of, in a sense, stylized fact, a high share of agriculture in output and employment normally correlates with a high share of informality. So one sort of stylized fact that emerges is that structural change, structural transformation in output and employment away from agriculture should contribute to a reduction in informality. And this is certainly true for instance, China and Vietnam. But you see, we all associate informality with agriculture. So the real debate, so the real questions really arise about informality within the non-farm sectors. The most discussion globally is about non-farm informality. So what do we know about that? Well, one, that a falling share of informal enterprises in total enterprises will certainly reduce informality. We know this from the data that, you know, most of the informal workers globally tend to be in informal enterprises. rather than otherwise, because any economy is constituted by both formal enterprises and informal enterprises, and a falling share of informal enterprises does tend to reduce informality. But with this, another stylized fact which one could point to is that within each sector, smaller enterprises tend to be informal. So therefore, what is the policy implication? And this is a policy implication in a sense about the pattern of growth. Policies should encourage and not stymie the growth of small firms. In other words, if small firms, obviously, or new firms will be born small, but there should be nothing by policy. Nothing should be done by policy which sort of stymies growth. I'll give you an example what governments can do to stymie the growth of small firms. For instance, in the early decades of India's development, one of the strategies was, in order to encourage, the growth of small firms and encourage jobs, non-farm jobs in India, was a growing number of products, especially consumer products, were reserved for production by small firms and small firms only. In other words, large firms could not enter. And this reservation lasted for 40 years. This lasting for 40 years of this reservation for small firms, just as the number of products which were reserved for production by small firms kept growing, led to the entrenchment of tiny firms. Some small firms would register, but there were tiny firms all around those small firms, which might have been suppliers, which ended up being informal. So what is the policy implication? Policy should encourage very systematically, very consciously, the growth of small firms and not engage in such counterintuitive policy like reservation. Let's investigate this pattern of growth and formality relationship further. The quality of supply of labor and informality is very important. So everyone knows the work of Arthur Lewis, who's sort of seen as the father of the dualism discussion, which began the whole formality-informality discussion. Now, Lewis says that if human capital is not available for development, as it is not usually in most developing countries, capitalists or the government will provide facilities for training. For instance, that's exactly what happened in the East Asian miracle. It happened in China, in Vietnam. And for many decades, India failed in this. The result of that, for nearly 40 years was growth was slow in India, and formality continued to, formality didn't grow. And this is particularly true from about 1950 to 1990, because there wasn't enough of an investment by either capitalists or by the government in education and training. So this is one clear stylized fact which just does seem to emerge. Another stylized fact is that increasing education attainment can itself increase demand for labor by attracting foreign direct investment. Now, I'm not going to go into what Leontief says about this, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, but the point is fairly straightforward that many of the East Asian countries invested in education, invested in technical and vocational education as well, and that led to a massive, increase in foreign investment coming in, which led to the growth of formal employment. So this is another important dimension. Now, this fourth stylized fact might lead you to think, globalization is a very good thing. Well, is it? Globalization in an open economy, what are the implications then of developing countries participating and developing firms participating in global value chains? Now, we know that in East and Southeast Asia, as well as in many Latin American economies, they increase production linkages between the globalization process and the participation of domestic firms in global value chains did increase the linkages between formal and informal enterprises within the country. Now, so when formal enterprises are growing as a result of foreign direct investment and the emergence of global production networks, what happens is also there's subcontracting taking place domestically, which would extend home-based work to the contractor, which then in turn enhances informality. So in other words, globalization is clearly a double-edged sword. Let me, clearly show to you here. Look at the bottom, bottom numbers. 2019. These are 92 and 22. Just look at 19. Here are the 5 Brics countries, and what you can see here is that they are at very, very varying levels of per capita income. The per capita income is in the lower bar, and they're at very varying levels. And as you would imagine, they're also at very varying levels of informality. Now, just look at the highlighted portion in this column. Here are the 5 Brics countries, and informal employment is the short share of total employment. What you can see very clearly jumping out is the following. 1, the low middle income country, India, has high informality, 88%. The high income country, Russia, has among the lowest, 21. But then the remainder are 3 upper middle income countries, and they have very varying levels of informality. Look at Brazil, 48%, China, 54%, and South Africa, 35%. So, this takes me back to that earlier argument that I was making, that at a given level of level of per capita income, you can have very varying levels of informality. What about the demographic dividend and the implications for informality in the Brics? What do we know about this? And I think I'm going to stop here because I've already taken about 13, 14 minutes rather than go into anything beyond this. So what do we know about the demographic dividend and its implications for informality? I'm sure everyone in this group knows what the demographic dividend is. It refers to that period in the life of a nation when the share of the working age population is rising and the share of the dependent population, which is below 15 and which is over 65, is falling. And it's called a dividend because the rising working age population obviously leads to many good things for savings, for investment, and hence for growth. But is there something that we can say about informality? Well, let's look at a few bits of empirical evidence. The demographic transition in East Asia is credited with rapid economic growth since the 1960s. Now, growth rates in Latin America have been much lower, suggesting that a transition to a higher working age ratio is not a sufficient condition to produce high growth, because most of East Asia and most of Latin America actually experienced their demographic dividend at roughly the same period. And so this Asia versus Latin America contrast suggests that economic outcomes can differ very much for rather similar demographic transitions. Now, what can we say about this demographic dividend respect of the Brics? Well, we know that Russia and China particularly since 2015, have become aging societies. Russia much earlier. But the good news from the perspective of both Russia and China is that their fiscal capacity is such, because of their level of per capita income and the fact that their populations are now shrinking, it should enable universalization of social security, which itself is very important to the reduction of informality. So much about Russia and China, but what about other countries in the Brics group? India's dividend began around 1980 and is closing by about 2040, perhaps slightly earlier by 2036. India faces among the Brics the most serious challenge, since it has the lowest per capita income and at the same time the highest informality. So clearly India's challenges are great, and the window of opportunity to ride on the wave of the demographic dividend and both grow fast and increase formality is closing fast. South Africa and Brazil, well, they're at the end of their demographic dividend. They've just, about 4 or 5 years ago, roughly around the same time, they've reached the end of their dividend and they have become aging societies. And yet, although they are upper middle income countries, they're still facing high informality. So their challenges are quite daunting at the same time. And final point, Asia's more favorable outcomes have been attributed to a stronger focus on human, that means education and health, human development outcomes, as well as physical capital. Now I'll close here in the interest of giving enough time for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Santosh. And let me just stop sharing. Yeah. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to open up a few minutes for discussion. In between, I would kindly ask you, including, of course, Santosh and Philippe, if you want to continue during the exercise, to also change your names, add, for example, Chinese, Russian, or English. Unfortunately, we don't have Français and we don't have Portuguese, so we don't have our mother tongues. And José, I think you will be with me with the English group, for example. For some that I noticed that did not sign, I kind of pre-assigned you. So if the assignment is wrong, just rewrite your language in front of your name. And while you get sorted on changing your language, I am going to open the floor to see if there's any questions for Philippe or Santosh. ILO people are also allowed. Well, as I see, there's a little bit of silence. I will ask myself. I think Tatiana Razumoto, you wanted to ask a question? No, okay, you opened the camera, so I thought. I was going to ask a question regarding for both of you, so maybe you can have a minute each. How would you see that South-South cooperation could help this, growing awareness on the question of formalization of the informal economy? And after that, I see, maybe I'll pick up also the question of Hildegard. Hildegard, you have the floor before you answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hildegard Hagemann from Kolping International. I would like to ask Mr. Santosh on the issue of agriculture being classically an informal economy. Do you have any approach, any idea, solution of going into the issue of formalization of agriculture without destroying, let's say, social structures of rural communities, etc., and also avoiding the issue of ecological strain in regard to growth in agriculture? With that, I would bridge also to Mr. Philippe in the sense of not beating the informal economy into the formality. Thank you.
Ms. Elena Zotova, you wanted to ask a question. I see you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. I would like first of all to thank the presenters for very interesting and very important presentations. And you see, we need to understand, are we talking about the same things? Because in our countries, the legal definitions of informality are in most cases missing. For example, in Russia, we have only statistical definition, and statistical definitions vary among other countries, and with Brics countries and with the developed countries, we made some sort of initial assessment, and it is a huge issue for us how to properly define the informality so that we can see the scope, the volume, the roots, and etc., etc. Because when you think about informality in different dimensions, you end with different definitions, and it is very, very different pictures you are receiving as a result. So that's the question for both presenters. What can you suggest or advise, maybe about the very basic definitions.
Okay, let me just see if there's any other question. Don't see any hands up. So, oh, okay, Anup Satpati, honored to have you here with us. I know you'll be in our closing session as well, giving us some speech, but anyway, over to you.
Thank you, Anita. Professor Santosh Malhotra is here and we talk always on this issue, and Philip is also here. I just wanted to know what is an acceptable level of informality, because no matter whether it is developed countries or emerging economies or developing countries, despite their achievement and progress, no country has able to reduce the informality to 0 or 2% or 5%. Everywhere there is some kind of informality. So what is an acceptable level of informality?
Okay, so I think I'll because in the interest of time, because we're also going to have an exercise, I'm gonna give the floor to Philippe and Santosh in the order they spoke, and they'll have 2-3 minutes each, you know, for having this challenge of answering 3 questions in 3 minutes. But I'm sure you have a synthetic spirit and you'll manage to be very brilliant as usual. So over to you, Philippe.
Okay, so very quickly, about not beating the workers in agriculture to become formal. I think, and myself, I worked 10 years in the Sahel in Africa. So I must say that beating, it means putting people under the law by force do not work. It doesn't mean anything. Frankly, what you should do is to help workers to have more capacity to live better and to produce better. This is for me. For example, providing them a social protection floor to protect themselves is also an enabling factor to help them to progress. Helping them to constitute, for example, cooperative or social solidarity economy, to be able to have a better commercialization of their product, better transformation of their product, better access to market. This is what I would do. I would not go and put people under the law by force. I think this has, in my view, in many parts of the world, no sense. With regard to definition, so definition is a complex issue. When we prepare a recommendation to a form, we avoid to give a definition. We give a description of what the informal economy is, and we include in paragraph 6 of recommendation 204 indicates that competent authority in member state should identify the nature and the extent of the informal economy. To some extent, the recommendation acknowledge that you may have difference between countries. What is more homogeneous is a statistical definition, because measuring is better, but obviously a statistical definition is no more than a statistical definition. In the ILO, we recommend statistical, you need to adopt the international statistical definition. And I remember, I'm not completely sure that for research there is some discussion about that. We are currently, the ILO, changing. We will present a new proposal to measure informality in 2023. That will be a new way to measure informality that probably will have implication. In any case, whatever the definition you take, what is clear is what I said before. Informality is not one thing, it's multiple things. We are speaking of what? Informal workers, informal enterprise, we're speaking about street vendors, we are speaking about subcontractor and global value chain. If you don't identify the problem specific of a particular group or particular enterprise or particular sector, informality doesn't mean a lot, I would say. You know, informality just to underline that the problem exists. The nature of the problem vary extremely between the group concerned group of enterprise or people or sector inside. For example, some sector, you have form of informality in the transport sector, you have not in the domestic work sector, you have not in the construction sector. For example, in transport sector, you have a lot of what we call bogus self-employment, disguised employment relationship. That is a form of informality that's very prevalent in transport sector. That is not a form that you will observe in domestic work, but you will observe also in construction sector. So definition is an issue effectively. And what recommendation to foresee that national authority should define in consultation with a social partner what the nature and extent of informal economy in the country. With regard to the last question, what is the acceptable level of informality? I will say that I don't know. I think what we know is that informality exists everywhere. After, it means it depends on the capacity of the country to deal with informality. For example, in low-income country, as Santosh mentioned, the rate of informality is very high. So probably the level of what is acceptable, if I take your words, of informality in Sub-Sahara, in the Sahel, in Africa, is not the same level of what is acceptable in France or Italy or UK, you know? Because obviously the structure of the economy depends. And for example, if when I begin my statement, I say that most people enter in the informal economy not by choice, but again, this depends a lot of the regions. For example, in developed economy where you have relatively good and strong labor market institution, informality is more often a choice of people. So a lot of the strategy to formalize workers are very much more button driven. It means penalties, detection, sanction, and things like that. Even if there are limits to what can be done. If you are in a country where institutions are weak, where people have no birth certificate and things like that, you should accept informality high. I remember when I was in Africa, I give you one example and I stopped because I'm speaking too much. We were speaking about labor inspectorate in one country of the Sahel. And my friend in ILO, my ILO colleague was saying that there is not enough labor inspector in that country. And I said, but what you do? You put a lot of labor inspector, what they will do? The women that are selling food in the streets, they have no alternative. So what you do? You block them? No, you cannot. So it's better not to have too many labor inspectors because they will not be able to do their job. It is as simple as that. So for me, there is no one level of acceptable. Acceptability is probably something that has to be defined nationally by people themselves. But what I anticipate is that the tolerance to informality, to say it in another way, vary deeply between countries. And I stopped here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. And this is really an interesting, challenging debate, no? And the acceptability and the levels of what, formality or informality, what can be taken, and the lessons between the different countries, which are very different, as we could see with Santosh's paper. And I see Snehal smiling because I think he's thinking the same. And we're all, at least me and Snehal, we're coming from Brics countries, so we know that in India and Brazil is massive, but in one way, very different realities as well. But over to Santosh. In between, of course, please, there's a very few that did not rename yourselves. Very few. There's like particular 2 iPhones that says iPhone, and then one that is a number, and then one that's FXL. So, if these people could rename yourselves, it would be great. Otherwise, you'll be assigned to the English, and then you just have to cry and ask to be reassigned. But we will also ask the translators to come to the language groups to save us in case somebody's in the wrong group or something like that happens. But over to Santosh before I explain the exercise.
Thank you very much for your questions, very useful. I'll try and answer all three very briefly. Hilda, I know you live in Vietnam, and I can tell you that for agriculture workers, perhaps the easiest way of quote unquote formalizing them is ensuring that they have access to social security, in other words, social insurance. And it has been shown that it can be done. Thailand in your region has had some success. I have a whole paper for the ILO in 2020, written as a background paper for the Global Employment Report of 2020, which actually looks at the Asian experience, a meta-analysis of the transition from informal to formal, which you might be able to access very easily if you Google me on ILO. So I won't say more than that. On the definitions, Elena, I thought Philippe was very humble in not reminding us all that the International Conference of Labor Statisticians in 1993 had come up with a definition about formality, how formality of enterprises is to be defined. And I assume that Russia and most other countries of the world signed on to that one. And 10 years later, in 2003, another international ICLS and International Conference of Labor Statisticians had supplemented the 1993 definition by saying that, focusing on formality of firms, enterprises alone is not good enough. It has to include formality and formalization of workers. So since then, ILO has used that, and that's essentially the kind of definition that I have tended to use in the paper. But I'm very interested to hear what Philippe just said, that you're going to come up with yet another one 2 years down the road. Finally, to Anoop's question, what is an acceptable level? And I would make a distinction in answering you, Anoop, to say the following, that from the perspective of the worker, 0% is acceptable. Zero informality, meaning all workers, but all workers in all countries must have a social insurance package that covers them. This is not negotiable from the point of view of workers, and we need to work towards that, particularly when we have the opportunity in our country over the next 20 years. In fact, we have to do it in the next 10. If we don't, then we will become an aging society, as most of the other Brics have become, and an aging society which has significant shares of workers or people who've retired from work, who don't have social insurance, are then destined to or condemned to working all their life. This is an unacceptable situation, especially in young countries where young people are joining the labor force. The older people need to transit out of the workforce in order to create space for the young. As far as informality of enterprises is concerned, well, I mean, I think we are going to get a chance to talk about that. It will take time, inevitably. And I won't say very much more than that, but it is perfectly possible. And this is, I'm being consistent with what I said in answer to my question to Hilda, that it's perfectly possible to ensure social insurance for workers in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure that Philippe and Santosh are going to be still around, probably in the group work. If not, Philippe, I'll provide your email to everybody. I think Philippe is going, but Santosh, I think he's staying. I will provide your email. I'll be naughty. I'll provide your email to everybody, so they'll start writing to you. In any case, thanks so much to both of you. These really two presentations are setting the stage for the continuation. Now I'm going to explain briefly the exercise, and I see Sneha is watching me. So if I say something silly, Sneha, please correct me. So I'm going to share my screen very briefly. You have received homework. And I noticed that some of you have already actually started working on this homework. So this was done by Google Slides. I know for some of the Chinese colleagues, it's a little bit difficult to open Google Slides because of Google restrictions, but do not worry. because we have three fantastic high-level assistants for you. We have Yutong, who is going to be in the Chinese group, and he has the Google Slides, so he will present it, and he can work with you on that. And we have Julia, Surina, and Karina Levina for the Russian group, and myself, Snehal, and Duncan for the English group. So basically, I have received a homework, which is an extract of the recommendations of the Brics seminars and the CIS seminars. So we basically merged them a little bit, and then we have sent it around. Some of you have already filled up the recommendations. So what we'll do is the English group will work on recommendation 1 and 2 here, and then you fill up the Google Slides so that we can have a joint. If you're having any technical problems, go back to the normal PowerPoint, but it's always helpful for us just later to merge. So this is recommendation 1, build on existing academic capacity of Brics and CIS and encourage them to explore avenues of getting out of the informal economy. I'm not going to read them out all because there are 6. The Chinese group will work on recommendations 3 and 4, and that will be kind of chaired and run by Yutong Liu. Thanks so much, Yutong. You all need extra salaries from the ILO for all this, which is not in your job descriptions. And the Russian group will deal with recommendation 5 and 6. So this is all in the Google Slides, and you have received them through the chat. But again, I just want to warn you, do not be stressed if you don't manage to open, because that will be shared by Julia, Yutong, and myself in the different groups. So the most important thing is to brainstorm, and we'll have exactly 20 minutes. So at 12:27, we'll come back to the plenary. So we'll need to assign one person per group. It can be Julia and Yutong, but it can also be somebody else that wants to take the floor and be proactive. It's fine. And for our English group, it can also be Duncan, but it can also be anybody else that would like to self-assign himself or herself as the group reporter. And that will be done in 2-3 minutes, because around 45 we really have to end, because some people have other appointments at 1, even though we have booked the translations for 2 hours. But in principle, this is a 90-minute workshop. So Sneho, if I have not forgotten anything, maybe you can assign us to the groups. And those who have not renamed themselves, we'll put them in the English group by force. And then they will try to maybe leave the group or come back to the group. We'll see what happens. But I noticed that 90% or 99% are already with assignment. So I think Ariana will do that, or yourself, I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, you didn't miss anything. We see you in the group. I'm just conscious of time. It's already 12:10. So Ariana will assign us in groups right now. See you on the other side. And the groups will close at 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and you will have a 60-minute countdown that will be available to you. 60-second countdown, excuse me, 60-second countdown. And we'll see you back in plenary in about 20 minutes. Over to you, Ariana, for you to assign us in groups. Thank you.
Yes, I'm doing it.
Thank you, Ariana.
I don't seem to be moving. I don't know if there's a little issue.
It depends on who she's moving first. I think that she's moving
Russian, probably.
It has to be moved one by one. So
okay.
we can't auto assign in previously, so she has to drag each person by person. So
okay.
Kindly be patient.
Little patience.
Welcome back, Anita. I hand over the moderation to you, Anita. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. So let's go group by group. And I think we can start with the maybe Russian group. And just remembering everybody that you have around 2 to 3 minutes, and at 45 we have to end. So over, I think, to Julia or whoever in the Russian group will take the floor.
Thank you, Anita. I will switch to Russian if you don't mind.
No, that's perfect.
Мы успели поработать над рекомендацией.
We have managed to work over the recommendation number 5. The recommendation number 6 will be covered by the colleagues by themselves. That's why I will cover the recommendation number 5 that regards the analysis of the care economy. We propose to enlarge the notion and to include not only the labor institutions, but other organizations as well that deal with the health, social security aspects and other aspects, because the care economy has many faces, many facets. That's why not only labor institutions should work over these issues, but it should be a multidisciplinary approach. Then we propose to have a comprehensive analysis and a study of the labor economy in CIS countries. I'm sorry, care economy. Yes, you're right with your correction, Tatiana. So I'm speaking about the care economy. It is important to have a big study and to see what is the situation in different countries. Another point, gender aspects should be included because the care economy is mainly associated with women, their role in the family that is often not paid. That's why gender stereotypes should be taken into consideration. The third point, to include non-commercial organizations in this study on the care economy and its contribution to the transition to the formality. Another point, public-private partnership to increase the potential of care economy. Then occupational standards, their update, we should see if there are occupational standards in our countries and what is their involvement in the care economy. Then the digital literacy development, and to include the topic of the labor migration, because the informal economy is mainly linked to the immigration issues, as well as the care economy is linked to these issues, especially for the countries that host migrants. Thank you very much. That's all from our part.
Thanks very much. And it's a great idea to give some homework to the participants. I will do the same as well. So now over to the Chinese. I don't know if it's you, Tong, or somebody else that will be doing the Chinese, but you can also speak in Chinese, by the way, you, Tong, to take advantage that we have our fantastic interpreters here. So over to you.
Thank you, Anita. The Chinese group, we would like to present Chuan Hua to represent us, to report back. Chuan Hua has 2 minutes to the plenary. Chuan Hua, you can speak either in Chinese or in other languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yutong. Thank you, everybody. I will report in Chinese. 我们就是有针对性的，就是
Okay, for our group, we have some different thoughts on the recommendation 3 and the 4. is the main points we have discussed. So the first one is we want to strengthen the cooperation between the CIS countries and the Brics countries, especially in the social security systems, and also the institutional cooperation should also cover the institution like the labor departments, and also we would like to strengthen the cooperation between the statistics departments or institutions, and also try to link the different social partners. And we also think about to strengthen regarding this the recommendation 4, we like to carry out more sample survey, and of course the different social security systems and institutions could be necessary to insert to be included in the framework, and also to the cooperation among the research centers and institutions, and of course, and we would like to have more report and paper regularly between all these institutions. That's all. Thank you.
This is excellent. And by the way, I'm putting all these comments immediately on the English form so that we have one master copy that will make our lives easier later on when we share with everybody. Of course, that will be translated to all languages. And now, last but not least, my own group. Normally, I would have been in the Portuguese group, but this time we don't have Portuguese translation. So we have our Hildegard Hagemann, who's extremely active, and she had already even done some pre-work before the workshop. And over to you in 3 minutes you have.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, we had to deal with recommendation 1 and 2. The first one is on building on existing academic capacity of the Brics and CIS institution. And actually, in a nutshell, we can say that we very much recognized and acknowledged the existing expertise of the Brics research structures, so to say, and so our recommendation are all into this direction that you strengthen these structures and also give them opportunity to go into partnerships to work together with the CIS institutions and to support also more methodology on informal economy to strengthen the knowledge. And also in this recommendation, we went up to, of course, putting the right funds and allocate the right funds to do research on the informal economy. The second recommendation is on to the ILO especially, and we had some work done beforehand, so we want to give the ILO the mandate to reach out to movements in the informal economy, because as we discussed earlier also, we cannot talk about people in the informal economy because we rather than involving them and talking with them about what they need, what the steps are necessary to get them into a formal setting and access to social security, for example. So developing training programs is another recommendation. Launch training programs for social partners and government departments, and also do it a bit in an interdisciplinary way, not to forget the health system, finances, environment, transport, etc. And also work together in creative and actors, so to say, as the ILO does already. Also, when you see how many famous people are supporting the work of the ILO, just to raise awareness. And last but not least, we had actually an open discussion about upcoming challenges like aging population and looking into the care sector. But I hear that is already something which comes up in other recommendations. So I leave it with that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hildegard. Thanks to the three reporters who were so succinct and have already brought a lot of homework for the ILO, because now we have to do a lot of work following all your recommendations, and I'm sure we'll follow up with our management and with also all our colleagues. And in ILO Moscow, by the way, I wanted to acknowledge also the strong presence of ILO Moscow colleagues, including apart for Karina and Julia, I see Blado, and there might be more colleagues that I didn't acknowledge, but also colleagues from like Yutong Liu, who is really proactively supporting, the Chinese funded project. He's CTA of the project and has been actually acting as our translator and facilitator as well. So thank you very much. Thank also ITC Turin, Duncan. I mean, I don't know if I forgot anybody, but definitely the interpreters, because we were even unassigned in the beginning and then we have to assign you. But also the authors of the author of the paper, Santosh Mehrotra, who has been even very proactive in the group work, which is also very much appreciated, and Philippe Mercadon for also his setting the stage. But before that, I'm going to give back the floor to Sneha, because I'm sure he has some announcements to make. We have to thank, of course, Ariana, who has been doing all the background work and the video preparation and all the difficult parts of our work that seems invisible. But over to Sneha for anything that I have forgotten.
No, thank you. Nothing much except to say that the recorded versions of the 3 webinars, apart from the group discussions, will be available later today. We are also still, I have just reconfirmed the recordings of the first webinar are still being worked on. We should hopefully have a solution by the end of today on that one as well. So we will come back to you on that. Please do visit the platform, because that is where you will find all the information that was presented today, both the southsouthpoint.net as well as or if I may say so, the eCampus platform, which you have both access to. Look forward to having you on next Tuesday for a webinar, the continuation, the third webinar of this series. And thank you everyone for being here today. And let me also add my special thanks to the rapporteurs, special thanks to colleagues in ILO offices in Bangkok, Yutong, represented by Yutong and his colleagues, ILO Moscow. I see Julia, Vlado, and Karina and others, as well as ILO Geneva, the proper presenters, in particular Santosh, Professor Santosh Mehrotra and Philippe Mercadon. Thank you to my own team. Thank you to the interpreters. See you next Tuesday. Have a wonderful. Oh, but Ariana, no, actually, Anita, you wanted to say something. I saw your.
No, yes, it was just a minor thing that people can actually feel free, because now they have the link of the slides, to add any points before next week, as it will be like World Cafe style. Next meeting, we will not have Google Slides work, because we have a big CIS presentation. But for the following, you can feel free to already start inputting. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Namaskar, Shishe. Spasibo.
Bye-bye.
Obrigado.